At her mother's funeral, a woman discovers the unthinkable. Her husband had been secretly involved with the nurse who had cared for her mother. But that's just the beginning. What she uncovers next will leave you questioning everything about loyalty, betrayal, and trust. This is a story you won't want to miss. Before we jump in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below with your thoughts. What would you do in this situation? You won't believe what happens next. Maggie stood at the edge of the cemetery, her eyes still red from crying. The funeral was over, but the weight of her mother's death pressed down on her chest. She had spent so many months taking care of her, watching her slowly fade away. Now, after the funeral, Maggie felt empty. She had always been close to her mother, and losing her had left a hole in her life. She didn't know how she was going to cope. Her husband, George, stood next to her, his arm around her shoulders. He was trying to comfort her, but it felt distant, almost mechanical. She didn't want his pity, didn't want his hands on her when she was so raw. She looked at him, her mind wandering how much he actually cared. Their marriage had been strained in the last few years, mostly because of her mother's illness. George had been distant, always busy with his own work, leaving Maggie to manage everything on her own. But now, in the aftermath of the funeral, Maggie felt a growing unease about him. She pulled away and excused herself, walking back to the car to gather her things. As she rummaged through the glove compartment, she found something that didn't belong. It was an envelope, tucked between the papers. Her fingers hesitated before she pulled it out. Inside were several photographs, clear pictures of George, smiling, laughing, with none other than Nina, the family nurse who had been helping take care of her mother. The images showed them together in different settings, looking far too comfortable with each other. There were even intimate shots Maggie never thought she would see of her husband, not with another woman. There were text messages too, words of love, promises of a future together. Maggie felt her heart drop into her stomach. She couldn't breathe. The world spun around her. Her husband, the man she had trusted, the man she thought would stand by her through it all, had been having an affair with Nina, the nurse she had brought into her home to help with her dying mother. She stared at the screen of her phone, scrolling through the messages, trying to make sense of it. How long had this been going on? And why hadn't she seen it? All those nights when George was working late, was he really with Nina? The truth felt like a knife, twisting deeper with every passing second. Maggie stormed back inside, her face pale, her hands shaking. George was sitting in the living room, talking to a few guests who had stayed behind after the funeral. His smile faded when he saw the look on her face. He immediately stood up, sensing something was wrong. "Maggie, what's going on?" he asked, his voice calm, almost too calm. Maggie didn't answer right away. She walked over to the table where the photos were laid out. She could feel George's eyes on her, but she didn't look at him. Instead, she slowly picked up the pictures one by one and placed them in front of him. "You want to tell me what this is?" she asked, her voice trembling but cold. George froze, his face turning pale as he saw the pictures of him and Nina. He opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. Then he sighed, his eyes shifting to the ground. He knew the game was up. "Maggie, listen," he began, running a hand through his hair. "This isn't what you think. It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like?" Maggie's voice was sharp. "I've got photos, text messages, everything. How long has this been going on, George?" George looked away, clearly uncomfortable. He shifted from foot to foot before finally speaking. "It started a few months ago. After your mother's condition worsened, I just needed someone. Nina, she was there. She was comforting. We got close." "Comforting?" Maggie could barely contain the anger building up inside her. I brought her into our home to care for my mother, George, to help me. And you. She couldn't finish the sentence. The words felt like acid on her tongue. You betrayed me. You betrayed my trust. George's face tightened. Maggie, you have to understand, I didn't mean for this to happen. It was a mistake. I don't know. I was overwhelmed. You were always so focused on your mother, and I was alone. I was trying to handle everything. The words were coming fast now, as if George could somehow explain his way out of this mess. But Maggie wasn't listening anymore. The more he spoke, the angrier she got. A mistake, she repeated, her voice dangerously low. You've been sleeping with her for months, George. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I wouldn't figure it out? Maggie, please, George begged, taking a step forward. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. Love me? Maggie felt a bitter laugh rise in her chest. Is that what you call this? A betrayal like this? And you still have the nerve to say you love me? She shook her head in disbelief. I can't believe this. I can't believe I trusted you. George reached out, his hand gently touching her arm. Maggie jerked away, her body stiff with anger. She could feel her heart breaking all over again, but this time it was filled with rage. Rage at the man she had spent decades with. I trusted you with everything, George. You were supposed to be my partner. You were supposed to be there when I needed you, but you weren't. You were too busy with her. And now you're standing here begging for forgiveness, like it's just some small mistake. George stepped back, his face pale. He didn't know how to respond. The guilt was written all over his face. Maggie couldn't stand to look at him any longer. She turned, her mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. But before she could walk away, something nagged at her. Nina, the nurse who had been so kind to her mother, the woman who had been in her house, caring for her when Maggie was too overwhelmed to notice what was happening under her nose. Maggie's jaw tightened. She wasn't done yet. Where is she, George? Maggie asked, her voice ice-cold. Where is Nina? George flinched. Maggie, don't do this. You don't need to. No, George, I need to know the truth. I need to hear it from her. Maggie didn't wait for George to respond. She turned on her heel and walked straight toward the door. George's voice called out behind her, but she ignored him. She had to find Nina. She drove across town, the road blurring in her vision. The anger was like fire in her chest, and every turn felt like the world was closing in on her. How could she have been so blind? The nurse who had been such a constant presence in her mother's final months, someone she had trusted so completely, had been sleeping with her husband behind her back. Maggie's mind was spinning, her thoughts bouncing from one shocking realization to the next. When Maggie arrived at Nina's small, modest apartment, she didn't knock. She walked right in, swinging the door open without hesitation. Nina was standing in the kitchen, her back to the door, humming to herself as she stirred something in a pot. She looked up, startled, when Maggie stepped inside, her face pale and tight with surprise. Maggie? Nina said, her voice faltering. What are you doing here? Maggie didn't waste any time. She walked into the kitchen, the door slamming behind her with a loud thud that made Nina flinch. She set her gaze hard on Nina, the photos and messages still fresh in her mind. You thought you could hide this from me? Maggie's voice was sharp, full of anger, but also cold with betrayal. You thought I wouldn't find out what you were doing with my husband. Nina's eyes went wide, her face draining of color. She stepped back, dropping the spoon in her hand onto the counter with a clatter. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Maggie didn't give her a chance to speak. She pulled out her phone and showed Nina the pictures. Tell me, Nina, Maggie said, her voice eerily calm. How long did you think you could keep this from me? How long did you think you could keep lying to me? Nina's hands trembled. She swallowed hard, her lips parted, but she didn't say anything at first. Maggie's eyes narrowed, waiting for her to speak, waiting for her to admit the truth. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before Nina finally spoke. Maggie, I never meant for it to go this far," Nina said, her voice breaking. George and I, we were just... It wasn't supposed to be like this." "You're telling me this wasn't supposed to happen?" Maggie's voice rose. "You've been sleeping with my husband for months, and now you want to tell me it wasn't supposed to happen?" Nina's eyes darted around, unable to meet Maggie's gaze. Her posture was tense, shoulders hunched, like she was waiting for the blow to fall. "I never wanted to hurt you, but George needed someone. He was so distant from you. You were always busy with your mother, and he was lonely. We connected. I didn't plan for it to go this far, but it did. It just did." Maggie's head spun. "Don't you dare blame me for this. You knew exactly what you were doing. And as for George, he's just as guilty as you." She took a step forward, her anger consuming her, but Nina's next words stopped her cold. "Maggie, there's something you need to understand," Nina said, her voice lower now, like she was letting something slip she didn't want to admit. "I wasn't just in your life to be with George. I knew about your mother's health. I knew how bad it was, and I may have helped her pass more quickly." She hesitated, the weight of her confession hanging in the air. "I didn't want to see her suffer, so I may have given her extra doses of her medication. It wasn't much, but it was enough to speed things up." Maggie's breath caught in her throat. The room seemed to close in on her as the words sank in. Did Nina just admit to something? Her mother's death, the one Maggie had been so heartbroken over, could it have been accelerated? Was it possible that Nina, the woman she trusted to care for her mother, had played a part in her passing? "Are you telling me," Maggie said, her voice trembling with disbelief, "that you helped my mother die faster so you could be with George?" "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," Nina said quickly, her hands shaking as she wiped her eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but George, he was always so upset, and I wanted to help him. I just wanted to be there for him. And then I thought, after your mother was gone, we could be together." Maggie shook her head, a mix of rage and disgust flooding her body. This wasn't just an affair. This was calculated. Nina had seen her mother as nothing more than a stepping stone to her own agenda. The pain of betrayal hit harder than anything Maggie had ever felt. Her mother's death, her husband's affair, both of them were part of a twisted game. Maggie didn't give Nina a chance to explain further. She turned on her heel, storming out of the apartment, her mind racing. She was done being lied to. She was done being kept in the dark. George had to know the full truth. There was no way he was getting away with this. Not now, not after everything. The drive back to their house was a blur. Maggie's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. Her heart pounded in her chest, and with each passing second, the anger grew stronger. She would not let this go. George had ruined everything. He had lied, he had cheated, and now he had helped cover up what might be a far worse crime than he could even imagine. She arrived home to find George sitting on the couch, waiting. His face was drawn, his eyes tired, as if he knew something was coming. He didn't even get up when she walked in. Instead, he just stared at her, as though waiting for some kind of forgiveness. But Maggie wasn't looking for that. Not anymore. "Get up," she said, her voice cold and steady. "We're done talking. I'm done with you." George blinked, taken aback. "Maggie, what are you saying? We can work through this. We can—" "No, George." Maggie cut him off, her voice hard. "It's over. I know everything now. I know about you and Nina, and I know what you did to my mother. You both thought you could get away with this. Well, you won't. George's face turned pale. What do you mean, Maggie? He stood up, his voice trembling. You don't. What did Nina tell you? I know it all, Maggie said flatly, her eyes locking onto his. You thought you could bury the truth, but I've got the evidence. I've got the pictures, the messages, and now I know what Nina did to my mother. You don't get to run from this anymore. George's face twisted with a mix of guilt and panic. Maggie, please, don't do this. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never meant to hurt you. Please, we can fix this. Please. Maggie took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was it. The final step. She wouldn't let him manipulate her anymore. No, George, it's over. I've made up my mind. I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. She turned to walk out, her mind already made up. The truth would come out. The world would know. Maggie couldn't let it go. The weight of what Nina had confessed hung heavy on her mind. Her mother's death wasn't just a natural passing. It had been manipulated, and now Nina's role was clear. She had acted with intent, her actions driven by more than just an affair. Maggie's stomach churned at the thought of it. Was Nina responsible for more than just her mother's death? As Maggie sat in her car, the cold reality of the situation gnawed at her. She could feel a quiet rage building inside her, a deeper anger that wasn't just about betrayal, but about something darker. How many others had Nina harmed for her own gain? Maggie needed answers. She wasted no time. She picked up her phone and called the police, asking for a meeting with an investigator she knew from her late mother's hospital visits. His name was Detective Harris, a man who had handled a few sensitive cases at the local care facilities. Maggie's hands were steady, but her heart raced. She had to be smart about this. She couldn't rush in without knowing everything. I need to talk to you about something serious, Maggie said when Detective Harris picked up. It's about Nina, the nurse who cared for my mother. She paused, not knowing how to start. I think she had a hand in my mother's death, and I think she's done this before. The line was silent for a moment. What do you mean? Harris finally asked. Maggie quickly recounted the conversation with Nina, leaving nothing out. The admission that Nina had helped her mother's passing along, that it wasn't an accident. She told him about Nina's strange behavior, about how she had acted with an unsettling calmness when discussing her mother's decline. Harris listened carefully, then responded. Maggie, this is serious. If what you're saying is true, Nina may be involved in more than just your mother's case. We'll look into it, but I need you to gather everything you can, records, messages, anything that could help us investigate. Maggie ended the call, feeling a sick satisfaction in the back of her mind. Nina's web was unraveling. George wasn't going to get off that easily. Maggie was done being quiet, done being the woman who let things slide. She had trusted George, loved him for years, and now he had not only betrayed her, but also helped cover up something horrific. He was just as guilty as Nina. Perhaps more so, because he had the power to stop it. But he hadn't. Maggie knew she needed to confront George one last time to make sure he understood the magnitude of his betrayal. She'd already told him she was leaving, but this time it wasn't about leaving. It was about making him face the consequences. The phone rang, and Maggie picked it up without hesitation. George, she said, her voice clear but unwavering, I need you here. Now. He arrived within 20 minutes, a nervous energy in his step. His face was drawn, eyes tired. He still couldn't seem to process what had happened. How could he? Maggie, I'm sorry, I don't know what else to say. His words came out flat, empty. No, George, you don't get to apologize anymore, not after everything. Maggie stood tall, her voice gaining strength with every word. You've lied to me. You've destroyed everything. But what you don't know is, this isn't just about us. This is bigger. George's face twisted in confusion. What do you mean? Maggie held up her phone. I've been talking to Detective Harris. He's looking into Nina. She's not just a nurse, George. She's been doing this for a long time. I'm going to make sure she's held accountable. And you will too, because you're just as guilty as she is. George's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. No, no, Maggie, please. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. I never meant for it to go so far. It went far, George. Too far, Maggie shot back, her eyes hard. You could have stopped this. You could have told me, but instead, you kept living this lie. And Nina, she used your grief, your loneliness to get to you. She used you to cover up her own twisted plan. George shook his head desperately, stepping forward. Maggie, please don't do this. We can work this out. We can... No, George, you don't get to choose how this ends, Maggie said, her voice firm. She took a step back, finally letting the weight of the situation sink in. You're going to face the truth, just like Nina. And the truth is, this marriage is over. I'm done. You've lost me. He stood there, helpless, as Maggie turned toward the door. I'll never forgive you for what you've done, and I'm going to make sure you both pay for it. Maggie stepped out into the cold evening air, her mind finally at peace with her decision. She had done what needed to be done. No more lies, no more secrets. And when it was all over, Nina and George would face the consequences of their actions. No one would get away with this. The truth had come out. And Maggie was ready to live her life again, free from the shadow of betrayal. Days passed after Maggie's confrontation with George, but the weight of everything still pressed heavily on her. The betrayal, the lies, Nina's involvement in her mother's death. It was all too much to process at once. But Maggie wasn't backing down. She couldn't. Detective Harris had made it clear that the investigation into Nina was underway. Maggie had done what she could to help, but she wasn't going to sit around waiting for justice to come to her. The wheels of the law moved slowly, and Maggie had learned that sometimes you had to take matters into your own hands. But just when she thought she might be alone in this fight, an unexpected ally stepped into the picture. Clara, her mother's longtime friend and former colleague. Clara had been like a second mother to Maggie for years. She'd been there for the tough moments, the birthdays, the anniversaries, and especially for her mother's last days. Clara had always been supportive, but lately she seemed to be growing concerned. One evening, after Maggie had returned home from yet another meeting with Harris, she found Clara sitting on her porch, waiting. Clara's face was grave, her eyes sharp and full of something Maggie couldn't quite place. "Clara," Maggie said, stepping up to her, "what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you, Maggie," Clara said quietly, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I've been hearing things about Nina. I think you're right about her, but there's more I need to tell you." Maggie's stomach clenched. More? What else could there possibly be? She was already grappling with so much. "Come inside," Maggie said, motioning for Clara to follow. "What's going on?" Once they were seated in the living room, Clara spoke in hushed tones. "I didn't want to say anything at first. I thought it would be better to stay out of it. But Maggie, I've known Nina for a long time. I was there when she first started working with your mother. She wasn't always like this. She was sweet, helpful, but over time, something changed." Clara's voice faltered slightly. "And I've seen things, Maggie. Things I don't think you know." Maggie leaned forward, her mind racing. "What kind of things?" Clara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I've seen Nina with other patients, patients who were terminally ill, just like your mother. And it's not just about her helping them pass quicker. I've overheard things, Maggie. There were conversations about increasing dosages, about making sure certain patients didn't linger too long. Nina started acting like she had control over life and death. It was subtle at first, but now I see what she was really doing. Maggie's blood ran cold. Nina hadn't just targeted her mother. She'd been playing God with others, with people who trusted her. The anger surged back again, hot and sharp. "Why didn't you say anything before?" Maggie asked, the pain in her voice clear. "I didn't know what to think," Clara replied, her eyes filled with regret. "I didn't want to accuse her without proof. But after your mother passed, I couldn't just pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. I've been doing some digging, asking around, and I found out that Nina had been working for several families with patients in the late stages of illness. I don't know how many other people she's hurt, Maggie, but I know it's more than just your mother." Maggie felt her breath catch in her throat. She had known something was off about Nina, but this was beyond what she could have imagined. The woman who had been a part of her life, part of her mother's life, was a predator hiding in plain sight. "You're not alone in this, Maggie," Clara added. "We're going to make sure she doesn't get away with it." The weight of Clara's words hit her, and for the first time since her mother passed, Maggie felt a sense of relief. She wasn't in this alone anymore. Maggie had never been one to back down, but now, with Clara at her side, she was more determined than ever to make sure Nina paid for her actions. She wasn't going to let this slide, not for her mother, not for the other patients Nina had preyed on. Maggie knew what she had to do next. She wasn't just going to expose Nina, she was going to make sure she was held accountable for every life she had touched, every life she had ruined. The police investigation had picked up steam, and Detective Harris was starting to connect the dots. Clara's information about Nina's other patients had proven invaluable. They were starting to build a clearer picture of the nurse's history, her involvement in numerous suspicious deaths, all tied back to her own need for control. The evidence was stacking up, and soon Nina wouldn't be able to hide behind her lies anymore. But it wasn't just about getting Nina arrested. It was about making George face the full weight of his betrayal. Maggie had been clear with him. She'd made it clear that their marriage was over, that she would never forgive him. But George, still reeling from the consequences of his actions, wasn't ready to give up. He showed up at Maggie's house one night, desperate, pleading. "Maggie, please," he said, his voice raw. "I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But I didn't know about Nina. I didn't know what she was doing. I swear to you I didn't. Maggie slammed the door behind her, cutting him off. "Don't even try to talk your way out of this, George. You had every chance to stop this. You could have come clean, but you didn't. You chose to protect her, to protect yourself. You're just as guilty." "I didn't mean for this to happen," George said, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry, Maggie. I'm so sorry." "I don't care, George," Maggie said, her voice hard as steel. "You're a coward, and no amount of sorry will make up for what you did." The door slammed again. This time George didn't follow. Maggie stood there for a moment, watching through the window as he walked away, his shoulders hunched in defeat. He wasn't going to win her back. Not now. Not after everything he had done. The next morning, Detective Harris called Maggie. There had been a breakthrough. Nina's arrest was imminent. The walls were closing in, and soon everything would come to light. Maggie wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Nina's reign of manipulation was over. The day finally came. Maggie had been waiting for this moment, but as she stood outside her front door, watching the police cars pull up to Nina's apartment, A strange feeling washed over her. Relief? Fear? It was hard to say. She had spent so long chasing the truth, and now that it was here, she wasn't sure what to feel. Nina had been taken into custody, charged with multiple counts of wrongful death, manslaughter, and a few other serious offenses that Detective Harris had uncovered during his investigation. There were more victims than Maggie had even imagined, and Nina's role as a manipulative, calculating figure was becoming clearer by the hour. Maggie stood still, her breath visible in the cold morning air. The police were methodical, taking Nina in without much of a fight. There was no scene, no screaming or pleading. It was almost like Nina knew this day was coming. She walked to the police car with her head down, her hands cuffed behind her back. There was no remorse in her eyes. It was as if she had already accepted that the consequences were inevitable. As the officers drove off, Maggie couldn't help but wonder. Had Nina truly understood the harm she'd caused? Did she ever feel guilty for what she did? Or was she too far gone, too consumed by her own twisted sense of power, to ever recognize the damage she'd done? It didn't matter. Maggie had seen enough. Nina was no longer her problem. The truth had won. Maggie sat alone in her living room, the stillness of the house wrapping around her like a heavy blanket. It was over. Nina was in custody, and George, although not facing charges, would never be part of Maggie's life again. But despite the sense of closure, there was no real peace. Maggie wasn't sure she'd ever feel at peace. Could anyone truly heal from this kind of betrayal? Losing her mother was hard enough. Losing her husband in such a brutal way, especially after the lies and the affair, felt like a second death, a loss of everything she thought she knew. Her phone rang. It was Detective Harris again. "Maggie, I just wanted to call and let you know. We've got Nina in custody," Harris said. "We've got a solid case. The prosecutor is confident. She's not getting away with this." "Good," Maggie said quietly, her voice more hollow than she'd expected. "She deserves to pay." "There's something else, though," Harris added, his voice lowering. "I wanted to tell you personally. George, well, he's been trying to make deals, trying to escape full responsibility. We're not sure yet how that's going to play out." Maggie felt the anger return. George was trying to make deals. Trying to avoid the consequences for what he'd done. She could almost hear the desperation in his voice, the same desperation that had led him to cover up Nina's actions in the first place. "I don't care about George anymore, Detective," Maggie replied, her tone cutting. "He's not worth my time. He had his chance, and he ruined it." There was a long pause before Harris spoke again. "I understand, Maggie. Just wanted to keep you in the loop. Let me know if you need anything." She hung up, her thoughts still racing. There was nothing left to do but move forward. And yet, the weight of everything felt overwhelming. How did you heal from something like this? From the betrayal, from the lies, from losing both her mother and her marriage to people she had trusted? The answer wasn't clear, but Maggie knew one thing. She wasn't going to be the same person she was before. She was stronger now. She had faced the darkness and survived, and she wasn't going to let it define her. As she stood by the window, looking out at the world, Maggie thought about the future. She had no idea what that future held, but one thing was certain. She would never again let anyone control her story. She was done being a victim. Maggie was going to live for herself now. The past was behind her, the future was hers, and she was ready to take it back.